There is a battle underway right now over a new merger in the media world, but this one is not like the others. This involves local news in the vast majority of the country. And while Trump supports this merger, the battle is not falling on typical ideological lines. Some prominent conservative groups oppose it. Meanwhile, there's a group that has been giving more money to Democrats than Republicans. That group supports this merger. This battle gets at the core of what's happening in the news world today at the local level. People still turn to it for news in their areas. You probably do. I do. In recent days, as things have been crazy at the Atlanta airport, I have turned first to local news where I live for updates. And people trust local news more than national news. Will this merger poison the news in cities and towns across the country, or is it the key to survival? This debate involves big tech and billionaire media owners, and it sets up an unfair choice for all of us. I'll explain, and I'll discuss an actual solution coming up. Plus, a woman you may have heard of. Her name is Kara Swisher. She's a left-wing media figure. Actually, she and I at least once spoke at the same conference. Anyway, she made an announcement slamming the new owners of CBS and saying she would not do any projects with CNN if the same company takes over there. She is just one person, and there would be no reason for you to think about this, except it says a lot about the media. After she made that announcement, the media went wild. And here's what no one is asking. What about the massive journalistic problems and biases at the media that she's already working for? I have reached out to ask her about that. Also today, the winners or losers of the Media Fail Awards. It's all coming up on They Stand Corrected. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It is great to have you. My name is Josh Lebs, and this is They Stand Corrected, the podcast that fact checks the news. You can learn more about me at my website, joshlebs.com. It's Levs. And you'll see my background, 20 years in mainstream media, 10 on NPR, 10 on CNN, lots of on-air fact-checking. Along with this show comes a newsletter, because unlike the media, I don't expect you to take my word for anything. I would love to have you fact-check me. Take a look at all the stuff I'm talking to you about. And it's free, so you should absolutely get it. And the people doing the most to make this independent show possible are the ones becoming paid subscribers. So at the top of the show, I always like to thank one of the latest. Let's see, when people become paid subscribers, they have the option of putting in a message. The latest one here comes from Lauren M. She writes, just listened to your podcast. Very excited to get links. I write for Pens for Swords and looking forward to having access to research. Thank you. Also, recently I had the 100th episode, and lots of people sent in audio messages for that. We're spreading them out across multiple episodes. This is one from a former colleague. I like to share these with you because sometimes people ask me, what about professional journalists? How do they feel? This one is from a former superstar news anchor in South Africa, who then became a fantastic force at CNN when I was there, Nadia Bilchik.
Josh Lebs, congratulations on the 100th episode of They Stand Corrected. And in a world that is so full of fake news, your work, your integrity as a journalist, and you bringing us the truth is more important than ever. So thank you.
Thank you, Nadia. She's so awesome. All right, let's jump into this. Sometimes there are business stories that are very significant in terms of what they say about our society and the fight for truth. But because they sound so businessy, they get really confusing. And even most people in the media who mention them don't really understand what's happening. So you hear a lot of quick updates and a lot of very basic summaries. Here was a recent one on CNN.
And Nexstar Media Group says it's completed its acquisition of Tegna, uniting two of the largest TV station ownership groups in the country. The deal still faces legal scrutiny, though. 8 state attorneys general have filed an antitrust lawsuit attempting to block the deal.
And then there were updates like this one from early today on NBC, which airs at like 4 a.m. Eastern.
A federal judge in California has put a hold on the $6.2 billion merger between Nexstar Media Group and Tegna after DirecTV filed a lawsuit arguing the pending merger violates federal antitrust laws. The judge writing the plaintiff asserts the merger will drive up the cost of TV service, shutter local newsrooms across the country, reduce competition in dozens of local markets, and harm consumers.
That is actually a very big story that affects almost everyone across the United States. Media consolidation is a big story of our time. Bazillionaires buying up more and more media properties so that those properties come under the same roof. It's people taking a page from Rupert Murdoch to become not only crazy rich, but also crazy powerful in controlling and directing the flow of information. What's happening here is that these two companies have been allowed to merge, Nexstar and Tegna. The FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, under Trump, waived a rule that said no single company can own so many local stations that it reaches more than 39% of U.S. households through them. The surface level story here is that this is yet another case of billionaires kissing up to Trump to get what they wanted. And that is part of the story here. This company was one of the companies that pulled Jimmy Kimmel's show off of its stations briefly after an uproar over his comments on the Charlie Kirk assassination. I covered that at the time. So when this merger went through the other day, there are some people on the left saying, aha, this is yet another case of Trump rewarding a media corporation for playing his political game. Here's Jen Psaki on MS Now.
That move was seen as Nexstar trying to butter up Trump and Brendan Carr precisely to get this merger approved. The merger means one single company will now own 265 stations across the country, reaching 80% of American households. Somehow, after Nexstar bent over backwards to take an action that pleased Trump, the FCC didn't care about that rule anymore.
One concern is that this could ultimately lead to a ton of stations being pushed in some ideological direction. You might remember, during Trump's first term, another company that owns a lot of local stations, Sinclair, had its stations all over the country read the same op-ed about fake news. It was basically a pro-Trump spin. And in each case, Sinclair had the anchor pretend that it was their own thoughts, their own words. There was a site called Deadspin that compiled a bunch of them together.
The sharing of biased and false
news has become all too common on social media.
More alarmingly, some media outlets publish the same simply aren't true without checking facts first.
Back in episode 73 of this show, I explained that while that was an example of right-wing media participating in basically a propaganda campaign together, big national media do very similar things for left-wing groups, parroting whatever they say. For example, tons of left-wing media just read whatever certain NGOs claim, like Human Rights Watch and Amnesty, which were long ago overtaken by propagandists and get basic facts wrong all the time. Now, it is different because those groups don't own these media outlets. So they're not forcing these media outlets to take part in left-wing propaganda campaigns. Big media just keeps choosing to. But let's dig into this merger, because this one is not strictly a partisan battle. As I record this, 8 states have gotten together to file legal action to prevent this merger from happening. They include quote-unquote blue states like California and New York, purple states like North Carolina, but there are also conservative entities on the same side. CPAC, the Conservative Political Action Coalition, that is one of the biggest forces in conservative politics, they are fighting against this merger as well. They filed a brief against it. Also opposed to this deal, Newsmax, a conservative TV news network. Owner Chris Ruddy testified against this merger in Congress. He said there should not be so much media power in the hands of a few.
There are 50 top cable channels in America. Newsmax is the only one operated by an independent media company. Every other channel is owned or created by a conglomerate. Newsmax's success proves the system is broken. and that this poses risks to competition, consumers, and even our democracy. We need more independent media. We need more competition, not less.
There's also a wrinkle in here that's relevant on a national level. While this battle focuses on local TV, there is also a national news network called News Nation, which is owned by Nexstar. Chris Rudd said Nexstar has been using its power to make cable operators carry News Nation and pay more for it than his network, Newsmax, even though he said Newsmax has a much bigger audience. Anyway, big picture here, when more entities come under the same roof, it can be tougher for smaller and independent operators to compete. That's supposed to be why rules against monopolies and companies getting too big exist. But what if this kind of consolidation of local TV, what if this is the only way for you to keep your local TV station at all? I went and dug into this because unlike big media doing surface level quick coverage, I wanted to know what's actually going on here. Here's the deal. There is a central question of whether local TV can survive. And that is, of course, about money. In the past, local TV stations made their money from ad revenues, but these days, fewer and fewer people are watching over the airwaves and therefore seeing those commercials. Those revenues are plummeting. People long ago turned to cable and satellite, and now they're streaming. You have probably never had to think about how local TV news stations make money in this environment. Well, unless you worked in that field or you're an advertising exec. There is a crucial source of revenue called retransmission fees. Basically, cable, satellite, and streaming companies pay local stations for their content so they can offer it. Those fees are a financial lifeline for these stations now. Meanwhile, AI is suddenly overtaking everything and may be scraping these local news sites for their content. News agencies, including these local stations, are trying to fight back. They're saying, if you're taking this content and if you're training your AI tools on our content, you have to pay us for it. Otherwise, you end up building a business with our intellectual property. But that takes a fight. Local TV stations need to demand and negotiate fees from all these big cable, satellite, and streaming services and the AI giants. Little stations don't have leverage to do that. So, a big argument in favor of this merger is that the more these local stations pull together into a single entity to negotiate, the more empowered they are to get legitimate fees. There is an interesting column making this argument. It's by an attorney who has previously served as an advisor to the FCC. His name is Adonis Hoffman. He calls TV consolidation a moat against extinction. I'll include a link to it in the newsletter for you. This is the kind of thing that the National Association of Broadcasters is arguing as well. This organization, the NAB, is nonpartisan. I checked contributions out of curiosity. And according to Open Secrets, this group gave more money to Democratic committees than Republican committees in 2024, but they are nonpartisan. Curtis Leggett is the president and CEO. When he testified in Congress, he argued that the whole concept of limiting how many stations can get together into one big company is outdated.
In a digital media marketplace dominated by Google, YouTube, Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Meta, and TikTok, ownership restrictions that apply only to broadcasters are no longer rational or sustainable. They prevent broadcasters from achieving the scale necessary to compete for audience, programming, advertising revenues, and investment capital. As a result, your local stations remain hobbled by rules designed for the analog era.
So this battle is complicated. There are stations that want this. They're a part of it and believe they'll benefit. There are other stations that say this would hurt them even more because they're not part of mega corporations. There are some stations in Indiana, Tennessee, and Mississippi fighting against this merger. While this debate takes place, both choices suck. Let local stations flounder or give even more power to billionaires. Those should not be the only choices, and they don't have to be. There is a solution that no one seems to be talking about. That's coming up. But first, a prominent media figure called a big media owner a terrible person and said she would quit a planned project that she has for CNN if CBS takes over. Big media went wild over that. It splashed across tons of headlines, but no one is asking her the most important question. This says so much about how the media refuses to course correct. There is a tool that lets you find music in the public domain that was recorded on any day in the calendar. So you could take your birth date and plug it in and see what was recorded on that date long ago, even more than a century ago. It's a fun little tool. Actually, supporters of this show, if you want to send me your birthday, I could do that for you and do some shout outs for you here. Anyway, this song we're hearing right now came out on my birthday, many decades before I was born. As I record this, I'm celebrating a birthday. It happens to be a special one, a multiple of 18, which is significant to me and to lots of other people who are part of a tiny peoplehood that I'm part of. It is a number that represents life. Several years ago, I was inspired to start marking my birthday, giving it a little focus when it comes around. A woman I know suffered a big loss, and she talked about how she learned from that to start taking a moment each year to feel joy and gratitude for being here for another trip around the sun. So now I do too. To celebrate, I have the levels for membership at the newsletter for this show set to significant figures. Every person who chooses to join the celebration there makes a real impact. I see every name, every message, every action. And you get additional content just for you. When the news feels dark, your support lights a candle. That helps me keep going. I feel so much gratitude, and I try to shine that light back for all of you through this show. Delivering the truth is shining a light. We do that together. Join me in this celebration at theystandcorrected.substack.com or just Google me. It'll pop right up. Kara Swisher is a left-wing media figure, New York Times columnist and podcast host. She created her own media company years ago and then sold it to a big corporation. She apparently also has some project coming up at CNN. The other day, during an event at Syracuse University, she trashed the owner of Skydance, the company that now owns CBS Paramount.
You don't want to work for the Ellisons. I've spent a lot of time with Larry Ellison. He's a terrible person.
Alrighty then. Anyway, she went on to say that she would quit CNN if the same company takes over, which is seeming like a real possibility.
I have no interest in journalism. And I refuse to work for an organization that doesn't respect journalists. It's a basic disdain for it as anything useful, that there's not a way to reform it except for hiring someone who isn't a journalist.
Lots of media went wild over those comments. There were tons of headlines about it. By the way, if by someone who's not a journalist she meant Barry Weiss, then that's just not accurate. Barry Weiss is every bit as much a journalist as Kara Swisher is. Whatever. Hating on CBS and Skydance is the new favorite pastime of people in big mainstream media. And CBS does have its struggles. Who knows what will happen there? But this story turns out to be very significant in understanding the big picture of what's happening in the media. It speaks to a shift underway and what big media is refusing to even look at. On her podcast, which is called Pivot, Kara Swisher discussed the uproar over these comments that she made.
Scott MacFarlane, who left CBS and is now with Midas Touch, said to him, I said, you made the right decision. And I was looking directly at him and joking. I don't think Larry Ellison's a terrible person. He's actually very funny. I don't agree with him on a lot of things. He's an amazing entrepreneur. Somehow these reporters were like, Kara Swisher thinks Larry Ellison is a terrible person. And then it became a thing.
It became a thing because she said it, and at the time did not say, no, I don't really think that. But it's something else she said in there that's relevant for understanding the media. She mentioned that a journalist who was there with her quit CBS and went to Midas Touch. That is a progressive anti-Trump organization. This guy wants to work there. Cool. And I've seen him say that he plans to keep doing what he's always done, bring people the news. But what Kara said there was that leaving CBS is good because its new owners are not adequately committed to journalism. And joining an anti-Trump political organization is somehow a good choice for someone who wants to do journalism. That doesn't even make sense. If you're committed to journalism, why not go to a place that's fundamentally about journalism instead of about a partisan position? There have been dozens of stories about this, and no one is asking her about this position that she has taken. Somehow that's the right thing to do. Why not go work for a place that's all about truth, if such a place exists? If I had $1 billion, I'd build one. Anyway, even that is not the biggest problem with what happened here. There's something even bigger that, again, no one has pointed out. Okay, so she would not want to work with CNN if Skydance Media takes over. Skydance is run by David Ellison, Larry Ellison's son. By the way, on her podcast, she said she likes David Ellison, would not want to work with him. She said these owners are not adequately committed to journalism. Okay, but what about the existing problems with the companies that she is already a part of right now? No one is asking her about that. This is a window into the problems with today's media. I mentioned that Kara sold her company years ago. The company that bought it, that she now works for, is Vox Media. She's been there more than a decade. It is a big conglomerate worth at least hundreds of millions of dollars. Vox is a journalistic disaster. I've told you about how Vox Media reports things that are straight up false. It was Vox Media that declared, as though it's a fact, the genocide libel against Israel. They just said it in their own words. No alleged, accused, here's a response. You know, the absolute basics of journalism. Vox Media does this a lot. Vox.com had what was probably the worst so-called explainer after the October 7th massacres. It was like Al Jazeera level propaganda. Vox Media also owns New York Magazine, an extremely pro-Mamdani outlet that refuses to acknowledge anything bad the new mayor of New York does or has done, like his wrapping his love for terror funders. Vox engages in left-wing propaganda instead of getting you facts plus context. Kara is also a columnist at the disastrous New York Times, which gets so much wrong and constantly pushes lies that are popular on the far left. I've cited dozens of examples here. When the media report on Kara Swisher's remarks, they play up what she said about CBS, and no one challenges her about the journalistic fiascos where she already works. This is a powerful reminder of how the news is failing you. News giants only recognize and acknowledge problems that they associate with the political right. In the real world, the problems are raging on both ends. And that brings us to the Media Fail Awards. Listeners voted for the worst of last year, and they were broken up into categories based on which topics the media blew it the worst on. Category 1 asked which topic the media failed on the worst in ways that benefited the political right. This is interesting. So the choices were immigration, the federal workforce, the economy, or the Russia-Ukraine war. And the winner, or loser, was coverage of the war. I get it. Some people believe Trump's biggest anti-democratic action so far was failing to support Ukraine. The worst example of news failure on this was CBS under its previous ownership. They interviewed a Russian official without ever bringing up the word democracy, and even took guidance from Russia on how to conduct that interview, which is insane. On the left, meanwhile, the choices were the genocide libel, coverage of Mamdani, left-wing radicalization, and the hostages. In this category, the genocide libel was far and away the winner. The previous category was closed. This one was not. More than half the votes said the genocide lie was the biggest failure. And for biggest underreported story of the year, The winner was something that is unfortunately always timely: Islamist genocidal attacks against Christians. As I record this, there has been yet another one of these attacks in Africa. I'm looking at reports here from Christian organizations that track this, saying there may be around 30 people killed in a mostly Christian community on Palm Sunday in Nigeria. This keeps happening. And as I reported last week, Iran supports some of these terrorist groups across Africa, which is another reason that big media has no excuse for constantly ignoring or burying this story. Listeners also chose the worst news agency of the year. I'll tell you which one that was, and a solution to all of this coming up. Here's another old piece of music. That's from 1922. It's Passover music. As you may know, Passover celebrates freedom from slavery. Think Charlton Heston in the Ten Commandments. Passover and Easter are linked, and it's believed that the Last Supper was a Seder, which is the ritual ceremonial meal on Passover. Maybe you celebrate Passover, maybe you don't, but will go to someone's Seder this year and learn about it, experience it. Seders are generally awesome. Hey, maybe you're hosting one and want to make yours awesome. If any of these things describe you, then there is a fantastic free resource for you. A guide showing you how to make a Seder meaningful, how to make it timely, how to contribute in a positive way to anyone's Passover experience. Plus, great food. There's a recipe in here for a strawberry shortcake trifle. I don't even bake, but I want to make that. Get this guide. Send it to everyone who might appreciate it. But only do so using my unique link. Thanks to a sponsored partnership, you'll also be helping support this show. So, stop what you're doing, check out the show notes, and click on the bit.ly. It's bit.ly. It's a short link, totally safe, to a fantastic organization. Stand against rising anti-Semitism by celebrating Passover and helping your Jewish friends do so with this free guide, only through this link. Listeners rated the BBC the worst news agency of the year. That makes sense. The BBC list of disasters goes on and on. They apologized to Trump last year, and it's not like in America where he has all this control. They apologized because they actually did misrepresent his quote. That was a case of a news agency being unfair, but that's nowhere near the worst thing they did. Here are just some of the things I covered about the BBC last year. They censured their own presenter for accurately referring to Hamas as a terrorist organization. They claimed that their presenters are never supposed to call any group a terror group. They're just supposed to attribute that to government officials. But I played you clips of BBC presenters calling other Islamist terrorist groups at the same time. And those folks, of course, were not censured because the BBC does not follow its own alleged rule. Applying a rule in only one case is a textbook example of bigotry. Meanwhile, after the United States, Israel, and Jordan rescued a Yazidi sex slave from Gaza, she had been kidnapped at age 10 by ISIS in Iraq. They ended up doing what they called a marriage, marrying her off to a 24-year-old Palestinian guy before she turned 15. He, of course, raped her, had multiple kids by her, and his family held her captive. Anyway, instead of covering this rescue the way that real journalists would, the BBC devoted 600 words to Hamas, calling her a liar, even though the proof of what happened is there. The BBC is so awful that I wrote an open letter last year. You can join it at the newsletter. Send it to everyone in the world, especially people across the UK, because it is funded by British taxpayers. A close second in this category was the New York Times. CNN came in third. We deserve better at the national and local levels. It's time to tell big media executives that what we want is truth. I'm talking CEOs, board members, representatives of big stockholders. These people have influence. We need to let them know that what we need and want are trustworthy sources of truth. Enough with this left-leaning versus right-leaning stuff. It's not about that. Keep an eye on the newsletter. I am putting together a new open letter to corporate executives that you can sign on to. Also, I'll include ways for you to contact them directly so you can let them know your thoughts on this. Together, we can demand a truth counter-movement. And hey, if you have a spare $1 billion sitting around, then let's build a new agency together devoted to truth. This is my final episode before Easter. To all of you who celebrate, wishing you a peaceful, meaningful one. Prayers for your security and safety in Africa and all over the world. I was in the Christian Quarter in Jerusalem last June. I'll share photos in Instagram and at the newsletter. And as this episode comes out, Passover is about to start. To all of you who celebrate, wishing you a joyous, meaningful one. The story of the people of Israel, people of Zion, people of Judea, Jews, Hebrews, Israelites, whichever word people use for people like me, is one of survival and a fight for freedom to exist as a minority without trying to make anyone be like you. It benefits humanity in ways that most people never realize. To all of you, share your thoughts, ideas, questions, and more through the newsletter or the link at my website. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you next week.